My HOA fined me $150 a day for refusing to move my yacht, the same boat my late wife named Hope Floats. Their president, Pamela, called it an eyesore, slapped violation signs on my dock, and even threatened to take my house. The neighbors turned against me. My daughter begged me to give in. But what they didn't realize is I wasn't planning to move the boat. I was planning to buy the entire lake and ban the whole neighborhood from it. My HOA fined me $150 a day for refusing to move my yacht, the same boat my late wife named Hope Floats. Their president, Pamela, called it an eyesore, slapped violation signs on my dock, and even threatened to take my house. The neighbors turned against me. My daughter begged me to give in. But what they didn't realize is I wasn't planning to move the boat. I was planning to buy the entire lake and ban the whole neighborhood from it. On a morning that smelled faintly of cut grass and lake water, I found a bright orange notice stapled to the railing of my dock. The Homeowners Association had decided my yacht, Hope Floats, was now an unauthorized obstruction and fined me $150 a day until I moved it. Imagine waking up to discover that the very thing that held your most precious memories was suddenly labeled an eyesore. Would you simply roll over and comply, or would you fight for the symbol of everything you had left? You see, Hope Floats wasn't just fiberglass and a faded cabin cruiser engine. My late wife, Sarah, had named her during one of those endless weeks when chemotherapy blurred the hours together. On the water, she wasn't a patient. She was herself. We would drift in silence, just listening to the slap of waves against the hull, as if the boat itself carried her heartbeat when she no longer had the strength. After she was gone, I painted her name on the stern with the same blocky letters Sarah once used for her garden markers. To me, moving that boat wasn't about storage or shoreline aesthetics. It was about erasing a part of her. But Pamela Greer, our HOA president, didn't see it that way. She stood on my lawn with a smile a little too tight, a voice a little too loud, and declared the boat a violation of community standards. She carried herself like a queen surveying her kingdom. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. This wasn't about rules. It was about control, about breaking me down until I bent to her will, and yet as she strutted away, heels sinking into my grass, I felt only clarity. She had chosen her battlefield, and she had chosen poorly. She picked the wrong man's lake. At first, the fines felt like a nuisance. Expensive, yes, but still just numbers on paper. Then the harassment shifted from private letters to public humiliation. Signs were zip-tied to my dock railing, stamped with the words, non-compliant. Property in bold, all caps, as though my home were a crime scene. Neighbors who once waved at me when I cut the grass now crossed the street to avoid even making eye contact. What Pamela had really weaponized wasn't just the HOA's bylaws, it was fear. Fear that if anyone sided with me, they would become her next target. And fear, when spread through a tight-knit neighborhood, works faster than truth ever could. I felt it each time I stepped outside. The sideways glances, the muttered conversations that went silent as I approached. Even Roy, a veteran who had always been quick with a joke, grew cautious in his words, glancing around before saying anything supportive. Isolation crept in, not because people hated me, but because Pamela had shown them what defiance cost. They remembered the couple forced to rip out their garden gnome, the family who had to repaint their house after their approved shade was discontinued. Small humiliations, but reminders that she would not hesitate to crush anyone who resisted. The emotional toll was heavier than the fines. My daughter Maya called after receiving a screenshot of Pamela's bulletin, her voice tight with worry. She asked me to sell the boat, said it wasn't worth the stress, that Mom wouldn't want me to suffer like this. It hurt, because she didn't understand. It was no longer about the boat. It was about refusing to let someone else dictate what my memories were worth. And yet, in her voice, I could hear the frustration of someone who only saw escalating conflict and a father too stubborn to yield. That's how isolation deepens, not just from neighbors, but from the people you love most. There were nights when, I sat at the edge of the dock, staring at the reflection of Hope floats shimmering across the water, and felt doubt gnawing at me. What if Maya was right? What if this fight only left me more alone than I already was? What if the only thing I won was bitterness? But then I'd picture Pamela's smirk, her deliberate cruelty as she twisted rules that didn't exist into weapons. And something in me hardened. I wasn't fighting a neighbor's annoyance. I was fighting a bully who thrived on submission. And I knew that giving in would not bring peace. It would only guarantee more battles in the future, with different excuses and different victims. The suspense of it all weighed heavily. Every morning I checked the mail, half expecting a new certified letter. Every evening I glanced at the road, watching strange cars slow down in front of my house. A man with a camera lens long enough to capture license plates from a block away parked across the street more than once. They were trying to break me down by surrounding me with pressure, hoping the isolation would corrode my resolve. But there's something Pamela never understood about men like me. Years in the Navy taught me that order only holds when you know where the weaknesses are. If a system is rotten, you don't rage at it. You dismantle it quietly, piece by piece. And so, while she painted me as the villain, I started to study her kingdom. I read every line of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I traced the chain of authority she claimed to hold. I asked myself the same question I asked before entering a salvage wreck. Where's the weak point? The hidden flaw no one else is paying attention to. I knew there had to be one. Pamela's power thrived on intimidation, not law, and systems. Built on fear always have cracks wide enough for the patient and determined to pry open. From the outside, it may have looked as though I was cornered, stripped of allies and dignity. Inside, though, I felt a different energy taking root. Loneliness turned into clarity. Humiliation transformed into resolve. And even as I endured the weight of her campaign, a single thought kept me moving forward. Pamela Greer had no idea that while she tried to crush me with her rules, I was already searching for the one truth that could collapse her entire empire. When you're trapped by someone else's rules, the worst thing you can do is fight them on the surface. That's where they're strongest. Instead, you have to slip beneath the noise and study the foundation. I knew Pamela's threats hinged on the claim that the lake was hers to regulate. So I started asking a question most people never think to ask: who really owns the water? It sounds simple, but systems this old always have hidden corners. And if you're patient enough to dig, you'll often find the cracks. I began with the State Water Commission, half expecting a board clerk to dismiss me. Instead, the official looked through the files and calmly explained that my property line extended only to the high water mark. Beyond that, the lake wasn't listed under the county, the municipality, or even the HOA. It had once belonged to the developer who built the neighborhood decades ago, but there was no record of transfer. That answer stopped me cold. If no one had transferred ownership, then what right did Pamela have to treat it like her personal fiefdom? Still, one conversation wasn't enough. I wanted certainty, not guesses. I drove to the county records office and sat under the hum of fluorescent lights, scrolling through dusty microfilm reels. Years of yellowed documents flickered past my eyes. Old maps, subdivision plats, deeds inked in fading handwriting. And then I saw it. The Lakeside Development Corporation, dissolved in the late 80s after selling the final lot. Roads and parks were deeded to the county, but the lake itself, unclaimed like an orphaned asset that no one bothered to notice. My heart beat faster as the pieces came together. That discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because it meant Pamela had built her entire crusade on a foundation of sand. Terrifying because if I was wrong, the consequences would crush me. So I hired an attorney who specialized in strange title disputes, the kind of man who made his living finding needles in bureaucratic haystacks. He confirmed my suspicion. The lake bed was still in legal limbo, a parcel with no active steward, drifting in a gray area of ownership. And under state statute, such property could be claimed if the proper process was followed. Sitting in my truck outside the attorney's office, I let that truth settle in. For weeks, I'd felt cornered, humiliated, isolated. But in that quiet moment, a door opened. Pamela wasn't a queen with unquestionable authority. She was a squatter, lording power over something she didn't even own. I realized then that her rules, her fines, her smug confidence, all of it was nothing more than theater. And if I followed the system, not her version of it, but the real one, I could end the performance for good. The thought was almost too big to hold. How often do you stumble across the key that not only unlocks your freedom, but also dismantles the very cage they built to trap you? I didn't have the victory yet. There were forms to file, notices to publish, deadlines to wait out. But deep inside, I already knew the tide had shifted. Pamela believed she was tightening the noose. In reality, she had just handed me the rope. The first lien notice arrived with the same thick embossed letterhead as before, but this time the number was staggering. $5,000 itemized as non-compliance fees, and a warning that foreclosure proceedings would follow if payment was not received. It was more than intimidation now. It was a direct threat to the home Sarah and I had built, the place where every memory of her still lived. Before I could catch my breath, a heavy diesel tow truck appeared one morning, its engine growling as it reversed toward the dock. Pamela stood nearby, flanked by her so-called legal advisor and the self-appointed head of neighborhood security. They carried themselves with the smug certainty of people who believed their word alone was law. The sight forced a question into my chest. What happens when a bully believes they finally have you cornered? I didn't flinch, but inside I felt the strain of living under siege. Even when the tow truck driver backed off, refusing to act without a court order, the moment carried its weight. Pamela's campaign shifted into a new, more insidious phase. A video of the standoff appeared online, edited so carefully that my calm explanations were erased. Instead, the footage made me look like some unhinged radical, the kind of man who belonged on watch lists. Neighbors whispered, and strangers online passed judgment without knowing a shred of truth. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it spread, and every share of that clip felt like another nail in the coffin of my reputation. The impact stretched beyond me. Maya called, her voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. She told me her promotion had been withdrawn, the company citing unfortunate public drama. I knew immediately it wasn't coincidence. A board member's business ties had poisoned her chances, turning my battle into hers. Hearing her say, "Dad, you have to stop, you're making it worse," was like being gutted. For the first time, I questioned whether I was protecting Sarah's memory or destroying Maya's future. Guilt has a way of making even the most righteous stand feel like selfishness, and in that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had. Nights grew heavier. I would sit in the dark, staring at the faint silhouette of hope floats against the moonlit water, and wonder if surrender was the only way forward. Would selling the boat bring peace? Would paying the fines and bowing my head end this nightmare? Pamela's voice echoed in my mind, smug and sharp, telling me that compliance was my only option. And for the first time since this war began, I almost believed her. The thought of handing her the victory burned, but the weight of watching my daughter suffer because of me nearly broke my resolve. Isn't that how bullies win? Not by defeating you outright, but by exhausting you until you surrender willingly? Yet even as I wrestled with doubt, a quiet ember of defiance refused to go out. Something deep inside me whispered that surrendering now would only confirm everything Pamela wanted me to believe, that I was powerless, that her invented rules held more weight than truth, that memories could be erased with enough fines and fear. I thought of Sarah's words during her treatments. When the world felt unbearable, peace isn't the absence of storms. It's what you hold on to after they pass. That voice reminded me that darkness isn't the end. It's the curtain before the next act. So while Pamela believed she was closing the book on me, I realized I was only entering the most important chapter. A man at his breaking point is dangerous, but a man who has stared into surrender and chosen to stand anyway, that is someone unstoppable. And though I hadn't yet revealed my hand, I knew my moment was coming. The storm she unleashed wasn't the end of my story. It was the pressure that would forge the weapon I needed to end hers. There are moments in life when the ground shifts, when the weight pressing you down suddenly becomes the leverage you use to rise. For weeks, Pamela had tightened the screws, convinced that each new fine and smear campaign brought me closer to breaking. What she never realized was that pressure can also create clarity. While she obsessed over controlling the shoreline, I was quietly putting the pieces together, building something larger than she could imagine. The day I received confirmation that the county had accepted my claim and transferred ownership of the lake bed, I felt the kind of calm only certainty can bring. It wasn't triumph yet, but it was inevitability. Pamela had been fighting a battle over land that was never hers, and now, by law, it was mine. I didn't rush to announce it. Victory without patience is just noise. Instead, I did what engineers are trained to do: build a system. First came the legal structure, a simple trust named after Sarah's initials, SB Legacy, because I wanted her presence tied to this win in a permanent way. Then came the documentation, layers of notarized filings, county deeds, and sealed notices. Each sheet of paper, each signature, was another bolt tightening a framework she couldn't bend. Finally, I placed the first physical markers. 3 modest white buoys anchored just beyond the dock, quiet symbols that the boundaries had changed. To the casual observer, they were meaningless. To Pamela, they were invisible. But to me, they were the outline of a truth waiting to be revealed. The real stage was always going to be the HOA meeting. I knew she would try to frame it as yet another act of her dominance, summoning the neighborhood to witness her control. But this time, she wasn't the queen of the room. She was a performer, standing on a stage whose lights were about to be cut. The meeting was packed, folding chairs lining the walls, neighbors whispering about the endless drama. Pamela walked in with her clipboard and forced smile, projecting the confidence of someone who believed she still held the script. For a while, I let her play the role. She spoke about frivolous resistance, about non-compliant behavior undermining community standards, her voice climbing in pitch as she circled the same hollow arguments. And then, at the perfect pause, I stood. Calmly, without raising my voice, I asked the question she had worked so hard to avoid: where in the bylaws was Rule 7.4? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I held up a copy of the covenants, turned to the empty page where her fabricated clause should have been, and watched the recognition ripple across the room. Neighbors shifted uneasily, their loyalty cracking as they realized they'd been manipulated. Pamela tried to push back, claiming bored interpretation, but the more she spoke, the more desperate her words became. That was when I placed the certified deed on the table. A simple piece of paper, stamped and sealed, but powerful enough to drain the color from her face. I explained, step by step, how the lake had never been properly transferred, how it had remained in limbo for decades, and how the SB Legacy Trust now held full ownership of the lake bed and riparian rights. I watched the gasps ripple through the crowd as the truth sank in. All the docks, the irrigation pumps, even the decorative fountains she loved to boast about, every single structure rested on land that wasn't hers to regulate. For years, she had fined, threatened, and shamed people over something she never owned. The reaction was instant. A veteran in the back stood and pointed at her, his voice shaking with rage as he demanded how she could call a man's memories an eyesore. Others began murmuring about their own fines, their own humiliations, their own suspicions of where the maintenance dues had gone. Pamela tried to shout over them, insisting this was baseless and hostile, but her words no longer carried weight. She was no longer the enforcer. She was the exposed fraud, cornered by her own arrogance. In that moment, I felt a shift not just in the room, but in myself. For months, I had been painted as the villain, the stubborn old man refusing to follow rules. But now the truth stood between us, undeniable and absolute. Authority was no longer hers to wield. It belonged to the law, and to the one who had taken the time to learn it. Vindication is a strange thing. It doesn't roar, it hums quietly, settling into your bones with the warmth of justice. As the crowd erupted, I didn't need to gloat or raise my voice. All I needed to do was stand steady, letting the silence between Pamela's stammers and the weight of the deed speak for me. She had spent months trying to break me with paper, but in the end, it was paper that undid her. The difference was mine was real. When people like Pamela lose their grip, they don't bow out gracefully, they thrash. And true to form, she made one last desperate attempt to reassert control. A commercial landscaping crew arrived one morning, trucks rumbling down the road, equipment rattling in their beds. She claimed they were performing community service along the shoreline, but I knew better. It was retaliation dressed up as maintenance. They moved with clumsy aggression, tearing into the ground near the waterline as though they could erase my boundaries by sheer force. I had prepared for this. Small weatherproof cameras tucked discreetly near the dock recorded every second. From my kitchen window, I watched as one of the workers stumbled, a 5-gallon can of diesel slipping from his hands and splashing into the lake. The slick spread quickly, iridescent ribbons staining the surface and drifting toward the nesting area where ducks gathered each spring. My stomach tightened. This wasn't petty vandalism anymore. It was poison in the water, an act that put every living thing in the cove at risk. I dialed the sheriff's department and the state's emergency environmental hotline, my voice steady even as my pulse pounded. Within minutes, a deputy's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Pamela rushed to meet him, her voice high and sharp, painting herself once again as the victim. She gestured toward me, accusing me of harassment, of stirring chaos in her peaceful community. But before the deputy could even respond, a dark green truck rolled in, the letters EPA stenciled in bold across the side. An agent stepped out, eyes immediately drawn to the rainbow sheen spreading across the water. His tone was clipped, professional, and unyielding. Who authorized this work? Pamela puffed herself up, claiming responsibility, waving her hands like a conductor desperate to control an orchestra that no longer listened. That was when I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, showing the deputy the camera footage. The spill, the frantic cover-up, Pamela shouting instructions, it was all there, time-stamped and undeniable. For months, she had twisted stories, manipulated images, and spread lies. But here, on the screen, the truth played out in a way she couldn't edit. Her composure cracked. Anger boiled over into shrieks, blaming everyone but herself. And then, in front of half the crew and 2 law enforcement officers, she shoved me hard across the chest. Pain shot through my ankle as I stumbled back, but it didn't matter. The deputy's hand was already on his cuffs. In one fluid motion, Pamela Greer, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was turned around, wrists bound, and read her rights. The charge wasn't just trespassing. It was environmental damage and assault. She went pale as the EPA agent cataloged violations that carried fines she couldn't begin to cover. The satisfaction was sharp and sweet. For every neighbor she had humiliated, for every family she had bullied, for every time she had called my memories an eyesore, this moment was justice crystallized. Not whispered in private, not hoped for quietly, but carried out in public, undeniable and final. Watching her shoved into the back of a cruiser wasn't just a personal victory. It was vindication for anyone who has ever suffered under a petty tyrant who mistook fear for authority. And as the flashing lights carried her away, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not just relief, but peace. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet, almost fragile, like the air after a storm when the world is still deciding whether to breathe again. The HOA, under new leadership, sent a formal letter of apology, signed by every remaining board member acknowledging their mistakes. My record was cleared, the fines erased, the lien dissolved. Even Maya, whose career had been dragged through the mud, received her promotion back along with a personal apology from the company's owner. It was as if the scales had finally tipped, restoring balance where chaos had ruled. But peace is not measured in paperwork or apologies. True peace is found in the small, almost invisible choices we make when the noise dies down. One afternoon, with Roy's help, I installed a simple wooden bench at the end of my dock, right where Sarah used to sit. On the backrest, we fastened a brass plaque that read only 2 words: Hope floats. No grand monuments, no speeches, just a quiet reminder that love and memory endure longer than storms, longer than fear, longer than the loudest voices of control. Sitting there, watching the water ripple gently against the shore, I thought of Sarah's words. Peace is not the absence of a storm, but the quiet after it passes. And in that moment I understood. The fight had never been about fines or boats or even lakes. It was about holding on to what matters when everything else tries to take it away. And finally, the quiet had returned.